Hi, this is Anne Marie Paquette with the Mosby Heritage Area Association, and I'm coming to you to talk a little bit more about one of the topics we discussed in last night's History on Tap program. So if you tuned in, you heard me tell the story of the vacant chair, which was composed in 1861 after the Battle of Ball's Bluff. And I wanted to follow up with a little bit more about music during the Civil War period, and how music affected the war, affected the home front, etc. And so one of the interesting things about the Civil War is it was really ingrained with music throughout in a way that perhaps no war thus far in American history had done so. In fact, Robert E. Lee is often quoted as having said, there is no army without music. And this is for several reasons. Your troops are going to be woken up by reveille being played by, a bugler. Your troops are going to march to the beat of drums. It's going to take directions from fifers, so the idea that the heartbeat, of your troop is really going to be with instruments, with music. But more than that, I think a lot of people take for granted how much waiting happens when you are at war. So whether you are at camp or whether you are marching from one place to another, whether you are imprisoned, music became a tool for soldiers to get by. They're singing ballads about home. They're singing about girls they left behind. They're singing, sometimes happier, more rollicking tunes, goober bees. So it's a way to keep morale up as well as a way to structure the day of the regiment. But none of this would be possible if, of course, certain members of the Army weren't already associated with music, right? So one of the interesting things about the Civil War is by this time, we already have a reasonably high number of individuals in the United States that are musically literate. And we really have, in my opinion, the piano and parlor music to thank for that evolution. We have records from the early 1800s and some from the late 18th century too, describing that, in notable households, the home will have a clavichord, a pianoforte. Thomas Jefferson brought over one of the first ones from England, I think in 1788. So you have this idea that music is something that's going to be produced in the home for the home, and is going to be, beyond, instruments that we might think of from the Middle Ages being the lute, the guitar, being something that a family will gather around an instrument to sing and to play for each other. But of course, in the 1800s, by the time we get to the Victorian era, there's going to be a lot of rules, a lot of etiquette associated with pianos in the home, especially because the homes that are going to have a large piano are going to be the well-to-do homes. So we see the piano being a symbol for young women, young womanhood. A piano is an instrument that a young lady can play and can be expected to do well at. And there are references to the idea that I think Walt Whitman wrote that there were many, young husbands identified listening to their sweetheart playing the piano, that this is something that young couples would fall in love doing. So that's one of the reasons there were so many rules attached to it, is because it was going to be part of this social interaction. So for example, if you were going to a gathering, if you're going to a party, a young lady should never bring her music with her, because that would seem a little presumptuous, a little show-offy. She was supposed to be very good, but not too good at the piano. She couldn't show off, or do all these little eccentricities on the piano. She should, stick to the music, be modest, but not too modest. They said you shouldn't have to insist that a woman play the piano, but simply ask, and then she should agree and then play the piano for you. There were less rules about when you should stop playing the piano for a group of people. So, that could have led on to a lot of long-winded evenings for folks. Jane Austen says in one of her novels, that finally father said that, the young lady had delighted them enough, and politely shut that down. So we have already, by the 1820s or so, we've established this culture of piano playing in America. But in 1825, in Massachusetts, Alpheus Babcock invents the cast iron frame for a piano. So until now, all piano parts, internal functions were wooden, which was not quite strong enough to really get high tension on the wires that create the sound in a piano. The hammer strikes the wire, that's what makes the sound in a piano. And so with wood, you couldn't get the tension to get really deep and loud resonant sounds. So with Babcock's cast iron frame, not only do you have a much more strong, rigid frame, but because it's not wood, it's also not going to warp with changing temperatures and humidity, so your piano will stay in tune for longer. And Steinway eventually picks up this cast iron frame. It really popularizes the manufacturing of pianos, because again, the tuning will last longer, it's more substantial. You can imagine how heavy a piano was before, and now, though it has a cast iron piece. So by 1825, we've improved that method enough, and we know that by 1867, there are 25,000 pianos being produced and sold just in the United States. That doesn't count any pianos being brought in from elsewhere. So we have, young women growing up playing the piano, learning the piano. Certainly young men did as well. The piano was a moralizing force. Music was a moralizing force, especially if young women were playing the piano. They were going to be playing hymns. They would play popular music as well, but popular music are, they're ballads. They would also be playing what we think of now as classical music. So Mozart, Liszt, composers like that. And so with this, growing of piano's popularity, popular music becomes something that's shuffled around a lot more. Music printing is becoming easier and easier. And so by the time of the Civil War, there's already a musical culture that is uniquely American and that's very robust in itself. So when we see all these musicians, all this music appear in camp, it's a new phenomenon, but it's not necessarily something that's unexpected, because we have a lot of the same music being played both in camp and at home. It's frankly weird to think about, but before this time, you wouldn't necessarily sing a song like Tramp, Tramp, Tramp at home, but now during the Civil War, because all, the musical culture is interconnected, you would have piano printings of camp songs like that, that could be played at home. And of course, the regimental bands, that not every regiment, of course, had a regimental band, a brass band to accompany it, but there are numerous, many accounts throughout the Civil War of these regimental brass bands and how they bring encouragement to not only the soldiers, but also the communities that they're staying in. Of course, one of the most well-known brass bands is the Stonewall Brigade Band, and that's one group that engaged in what I like to think of as a historic battle of the bands on the Rappahannock River before the Battle of Fredericksburg in 1862. And so they were playing on the southern side of the river, and then there was a Yankee group playing on the opposite side, but it was all in good spirits, the idea that they would exchange this musical repartee. And so we do have a few examples of regimental band music or bands playing also here in the Heritage area. For example, in September of 1862, when Lee's Army of Northern Virginia is heading up to what would be the Battle of Antietam, we know that he has a band with him, and there is a local resident, Molly Lack in Leesburg, who writes, that while the band is in town for several days, she goes and will go listen to the band play. Just so happens she also has a sweetheart in the Southern Army. So I would imagine that would also be a social engagement to get to visit, these young soldiers, as well as listen to patriotic tunes with the band. There's also another example from Warrenton down in Fauquier County, Virginia, that I really enjoy, and this is Susan Caldwell wrote to her husband about about this incident where they're actually being occupied by United States forces at the time, but the group has a regimental band with them. And so the band is playing in town, and Susan can't help but enjoy the music, even if she couldn't be more displeased about, about the Union Army being in town. So she wrote, "Yankees haven't been in sight since I came home, have only the privilege of the best part of their army, their band." So the soldiers, not sure we're there, but the band is still in town, they're playing. "Yes, music will have charms, although the performers are hateful." So there's this idea that the music itself redeems the fact that it's being played by those damn Yankees a little bit. That's just a quick blurb more about the history of music during the Civil War, and some of the individuals here in the Heritage area who encountered music, who played music, who enjoyed music. If you all are interested in hearing some Civil War tunes, I highly recommend looking up the album Divided and United. It's a collection of Civil War songs, but recorded by modern artists. So it's a fun new take on some of these old tunes. Thank you so much for watching. Please stay tuned, mosbyheritagearea.org, to learn more about the Heritage Area, find more activities to do. And if you enjoy these programs, History on Tap, videos, blogs, etc., I encourage you to please send us a donation. Thank you so much, and have a good weekend.